What did Lechfeld really decide in 955 beyond the fate of a single battle? Otto's realm was still a fragile alliance of dukes, bishops, and regional loyalties, held together by force, negotiation, and fear. Magyar raiding exposed how vulnerable this world remained, while noble rebellion showed how easily it could fracture from within. The victory at Lechfeld mattered because it did more than stop an invasion. It gave Otto the authority to bind a divided society into something stronger, more disciplined, and more recognizably German. Why were the Magyars so terrifying to settled medieval society? Their power came not from castles or cities, but from mobility, surprise, and psychological shock. They moved faster than most European armies could respond, striking farms, monasteries, and market towns with ruthless precision. To peasants, clergy, and local lords, they were not just an enemy army, but a force that turned ordinary life into insecurity. Crops could be burned, labor interrupted, trade broken, and entire regions emptied of confidence. Why did the Great Raid of 954 become a turning point in the politics of the realm? Because raids were not only acts of plunder, they were tests of legitimacy. When Magyar forces devastated wide stretches of territory, they exposed the weakness of fragmented lordship and the cost of rivalry among German nobles. Local magnates could no longer pretend that private ambition mattered more than collective survival. The destruction of villages, churches, and routes of exchange made the lesson undeniable. A society divided by feuds could not defend itself. How could Otto defend the kingdom when even his own family challenged him? The rebellion of Liudolf and Conrad the Red revealed the deep strain inside the Ottonian world. Dynastic kinship did not automatically mean loyalty, and powerful men still saw the kingdom as something they could bargain over or seize. This internal conflict mattered because it drained manpower, delayed response, and invited outside danger. While the elite fought over status and inheritance, ordinary people paid the price in insecurity and exposure. What did reconciliation at Langenzen mean in a society built on honor and vengeance? It meant that the kingdom had begun to understand survival as a shared interest. Conrad's submission was not simply humiliation, it was a recognition that noble status now had to be balanced against the defense of the realm. Otto could not win by punishing every rival endlessly. He needed to reabsorb the aristocracy into a wider political order, one in which loyalty, military service, and royal favor were tied together. Why did Otto's rejection of Magyar diplomacy matter so much? In the medieval world, envoys, gifts, and negotiations were often masks for deeper intentions. The Magyar messengers may have come with the language of peace, but Otto understood that strength, not submission, would shape the next confrontation. By refusing to be drawn into delay or deception, he signaled that the kingdom would no longer live in fear of raiders dictating the terms. A ruler who could answer intimidation with confidence gained something priceless, the belief of his own people that resistance was possible. Why did Augsburg become the center of the crisis? Because cities were more than walls. They were nodes of administration, faith, and supply. Augsburg stood at a strategic crossing of roads and river routes, making it valuable not just as a prize, but as a symbol of whether organized Christian society could endure attack. When the Magyars struck it, they were challenging the ability of a settled urban community to survive nomadic warfare. The siege forced civilians, clergy, and soldiers into the same shared struggle. How did Bishop Ulrich embody the social meaning of the defense? He was not merely a religious figure on the walls, he was the moral center of a threatened community. Ulrich represented the growing role of bishops as protectors, organizers, and public leaders in a world where royal power was still uneven. His presence told the people of Augsburg that the church was not separate from political survival. Prayer, repair work, discipline, and endurance all became part of the same defense. What did the siege teach about the labor of survival? It showed that medieval war was never only fought by mounted elites. Citizens, servants, artisans, and clergy worked through the night to reinforce walls, carry materials, and sustain morale. Siege warfare transformed ordinary people into participants in collective endurance. Every trench dug and every palisade raised was an act of social cooperation under pressure. The city survived because a community under stress learned to act as one body. Why did the Magyars leave the siege and choose the Lechfeld? Because they believed open ground would restore their advantage. On a plain, their cavalry could move freely, disrupt formations, and use speed as a weapon. Yet their choice also reveals a major transformation in warfare. The Magyars were no longer just raiders, but a force trying to decide the fate of regions. By shifting from harassment to pitched battle, they accepted a risk that raid-based warfare usually avoided. How did Otto turn the landscape itself into a weapon of kingship? He marched carefully, using rough ground, river lines, and terrain discipline to blunt the enemy's mobility. This was not only battlefield skill, it was statecraft in motion. A ruler who could coordinate movement, logistics, and formation demonstrated that authority had practical value. Otto's army had to cross a dangerous zone with patience and trust, which meant the king was asking for more than obedience. He was asking them to believe in a shared political future. Who stood in Otto's army, and what did that reveal about society? The force was not a single national army in the modern sense, but a coalition of Saxons, Bavarians, Franconians, Swabians, and allies, bound together by royal leadership and necessity. That composition mattered because it showed how political identity was being forged through cooperation in war. Dukes and counts did not disappear, but they began to operate within a broader framework centered on the king. The army became a moving image of the realm itself, diverse, uneasy, but capable of unity. How did the Magyar attack test the resilience of that coalition? Their tactics were designed to break confidence, isolate units, and turn formation into confusion. A pincer maneuver, repeated harassment, and arrow storms were all meant to make the German host collapse into panic. But the coalition held because it had learned that internal division would mean death. Battle here was not just about weapons, it was about discipline, hierarchy, and trust among different regional forces. The enemy tried to shatter society through fear, but the coalition answered with cohesion. Why was the collapse of one legion so important? Because medieval armies depended heavily on morale, not just numbers. When a formation broke, it could trigger doubt in nearby units and open the door to disaster. If the coalition had fractured there, Otto's authority might have been remembered as weak and temporary. Instead, the crisis became a moment of testing. What saved the army was not perfection, but the ability to absorb shock and continue. In war and in society alike, resilience often mattered more than flawless strength. How did Conrad the Red's presence at the battle reflect the kingdom's deeper transformation? His role symbolized the possibility of redemption through service. A former rebel fighting for the realm showed that political enemies could be reabsorbed into a larger order when survival demanded it. This is one of the most important social lessons of Lechfeld. Power was no longer simply about personal feuds and blood claims. It was beginning to depend on whether nobles could be reintegrated into the king's project. Otto's victory gave him the authority to forgive, command, and remake loyalty. Why did the Holy Lance matter so much to Otto's men? Relics gave medieval war a sacred dimension, turning military struggle into a contest watched by heaven. The banner and the lance were not magic in a modern sense, but they were powerful symbols of order, legitimacy, and divine favor. In a world where uncertainty was everywhere, symbols helped weld men together across fear and fatigue. Otto's leadership depended not only on force, but on meaning. By raising the sacred standard, he told his soldiers that their cause was larger than survival. What did the charge of the armored cavalry represent? It represented the growing value of disciplined elite warfare tied to lordship and service. The impact of the charge broke the rhythm of the Magyar attack and showed that heavy mounted force, when coordinated properly, could answer mobility with shock. But the significance went beyond tactics. It showed that the military classes of the realm were becoming more integrated into royal purpose. Knights, nobles, and followers were no longer simply private warriors seeking glory. They were being shaped into instruments of broader political stability. How did the storm change the meaning of the battle? Weather did not just alter movement, it reinforced the sense that fortune had turned. Rain, mud, and reduced visibility punished the Magyars' dependence on speed and exposed their forces to confusion. Medieval people often read such moments as signs of divine judgment, and that mattered socially because victories had to be explained in moral terms. Otto's success was remembered not simply as tactical skill, but as providential favor. That belief strengthened royal legitimacy and made the victory harder to dismiss as luck. Why was the Lech River so decisive for the fleeing Magyars? Because retreat itself became a trap. Once the battle line broke, escape routes narrowed, crossings turned dangerous, and the landscape that had promised mobility became a field of punishment. This was the final reversal of a people who had long terrified settled societies by moving too quickly to catch. At Lechfeld, the environment, the weather, and Otto's coordination all worked together against them. The lesson for Europe was profound. Even the most feared raiders could be contained. What happened after the battle mattered just as much as the battle itself. Captured chieftains, broken raiders, and the memory of triumph allowed Otto to present himself as the protector of Christian order. Over time, the Magyar world would change too, moving towards settlement, state formation, and eventual conversion. For Otto, the victory strengthened kingship, reduced the immediate threat of noble division, and elevated bishops and royal allies as pillars of governance. The battle did not create medieval Germany overnight, but it accelerated the process by which scattered powers came to recognize a stronger center. What did Lechfeld ultimately forge? Not a nation in the modern sense, but a new political and social confidence in the Eastern Frankish realm. Otto's victory showed that a fractured kingdom could cooperate under royal leadership, that bishops and nobles could serve a larger order, and that external threats could help define internal unity. From this struggle emerged the groundwork of medieval German power and the Ottonian imperial vision that would shape Europe for generations. Lechfeld was not only a battle won, it was a world reordered.